We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and...
The words were simple, but their meaning was brutal. Access denied. Meghan arrived at the palace expecting the gates to open, only to find royal guards standing firmly in her path. There was no confusion, no missing name on a list, and no hurried call to fix a mistake. The instruction had already been given. Prince William had issued his final order, and for Meghan, one of the most symbolic doors in Britain had just closed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan expected someone to correct the situation within seconds. Instead, she asked the senior guard for an explanation and heard something far more serious than a technical delay. Royal guards are ceremonial soldiers who also carry out security duties at important royal locations, and on this day, their position left no room for personal interpretation. The instruction was clear. She was not authorized to enter. That mattered, because this was not a distant government building or unfamiliar residence. This was a palace tied directly to the family she had married into, a place where access once came naturally with her former royal role. Now that same entrance had become a boundary. The Duchess pressed again, convinced there had to be some mistake behind the scenes. The guard remained respectful but firm. Her name had not simply vanished from an old visitor list. A fresh instruction had been circulated shortly before her arrival, and it carried the authority of William. The prince had not left the decision to chance. He had issued a final security order that prevented her from entering without prior approval, and the timing suggested he knew she was coming. In that instant, confusion turned into humiliation. Meghan was no longer asking when the gate would open. She was trying to understand why someone inside had decided it should remain closed. Harry learned what had happened soon afterward, and anger came fast. To him, the refusal was not merely about procedure. His brother had drawn a line around an institution they had both grown up inside, and Meghan had been stopped on the outside of it. The Duke understood security rules, but this felt different because the instruction carried William's personal authority. What hurt most was the message behind it. Old family connections would no longer guarantee old privileges. Meghan then asked the question that could have changed everything. Could King Charles override the decision? The guard did not enter into a discussion about royal rank. He simply repeated that admission had not been authorized. Charles, as the reigning monarch, remained the head of the royal household, yet even his position did not produce an immediate reversal at that gate. That silence hinted at something deeper. William's order did not appear impulsive, isolated, or accidental. The closed entrance suddenly became only the beginning. Somewhere before Meghan arrived, a decision had already been made, and someone had believed the consequences were worth it. To understand why William was willing to let the confrontation happen at the palace gates, the story had to move away from the guards and toward Meghan, Harry, and the future king, the three people whose damaged history had made one refusal so explosive. This was never only about a gate. Behind William's order stood years of damaged trust, competing loyalties, private grievances, and one relationship that had never fully recovered. Meghan saw the restriction as humiliation. Harry saw it as rejection. William saw it as protection. Three interpretations of the same moment collided at once, and beneath them sat an even more dangerous truth. Each believed the others had already crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. Harry reacted first. The moment he heard exactly what Meghan had been told, he called her and asked her to repeat the guard's words from the beginning. She did, slowly, carefully. And the more detail she gave him, the more his anger sharpened. A working royal is a family member carrying out official duties on behalf of the monarch, and Meghan no longer held that role. But to Harry, that did not erase years of family connection or make the palace emotionally neutral ground. The refusal mattered because it touched both identity and belonging. His wife had not been stopped at some distant office. She had been stopped at the edge of the world he had once called home. William understood the weight from another direction. The prince was not only Harry's older brother anymore. He was also carrying growing responsibility for the stability of the institution he was expected one day to lead. That made every private family disagreement dangerous when it spilled into royal procedure. When an aide later told him that Harry was furious, William did not argue. He did not demand details. He simply placed his phone face down and remained silent for a moment. Then he confirmed that the instruction would stand. For the future king, preserving peace with his brother had finally become less important than enforcing a boundary he believed the palace needed. Meghan felt something colder than anger. She replayed the encounter, especially the moment the guard made clear that the decision had come from above. Her history with the family made that detail sting. She had once entered royal residences as part of official life. Now she needed permission simply to cross a threshold connected to it. Harry heard that pain in her voice, and his frustration deepened. He was no longer asking whether the guards had misunderstood an instruction. He was asking whether William had prepared the order before Meghan even arrived. That suspicion changed everything. Harry began to believe the refusal had been planned in advance, which meant his brother had already made up his mind before the palace entrance confrontation ever happened. William, meanwhile, carried another piece of the story that neither of them could ignore. A private palace conversation had convinced him that Meghan's proposed visit was not as simple as it first appeared. Something had been discussed, something had been requested, and something in that exchange had pushed him toward a far harder position. The guards had delivered the refusal, but they had not created it. The real point of no return had happened earlier, inside a private royal gathering, where one conversation changed William's judgment completely. And once that moment came back into focus, the order at the gate no longer looked sudden at all. Every royal rupture has a moment people later remember differently. This one had a room, a conversation, and a sudden silence. Weeks before Meghan reached the palace gate, William had attended a private family planning dinner, where old tensions were expected but manageable. Then Meghan raised a matter involving future palace access, private family spaces, and her right to enter them during visits. What followed lasted only minutes. Yet for William, those minutes became the reason the guards would eventually say no. William had entered the dinner hoping to keep everything calm. Harry was there, Meghan was there, and the discussion began around future family visits and upcoming royal engagements. A royal engagement is an official duty carried out on behalf of the monarchy, while a private family visit is personal and does not carry the same automatic access. That difference mattered because the line between family and institution had already become painfully thin. Meghan wanted clarity about where she could go during future visits. Harry wanted the conversation handled with dignity. William wanted rules that could not be bent by emotion. Meghan finally pushed the issue further. She insisted that future visits should include direct access to a restricted palace family corridor, without needing separate approval each time. William rejected the request almost immediately. For him, that corridor was not simply another hallway. It connected private family spaces, where access depended on current security clearance and household approval. Meghan heard something else in his refusal. She heard distance. She heard exclusion. And she asked why someone with her history inside the family should have to seek permission every time she returned. Harry stepped in before the tension could settle. He told William that treating Meghan like an outsider would only deepen the resentment already dividing them. The prince did not shout back. He answered with something colder. Family connection and institutional access were no longer the same thing. Harry stared at his brother because the sentence carried more weight than the immediate disagreement. Meghan understood it too. This was not about one corridor anymore. William was defining where personal history stopped and royal privilege ended. The room changed when Meghan asked him directly whether he intended to personally prevent her from entering in the future. William did not answer at once. He set his glass down, waited through the silence, and finally said access would depend on what protected the household. That was the moment everything hardened. Meghan had wanted certainty. She got it, but not in the form she expected. Harry saw that the argument had crossed into something more permanent, and William seemed to realize there would be no easy way back. William acted after the dinner instead of letting the exchange fade. He spoke privately with a senior aide and requested a complete review of Meghan's existing palace entry permissions. The review was simply an examination of which old access rights remained active and whether they still matched her current role. That quiet request became the seed of the order that later stopped her at the gate. Yet even then, compromise was still possible. The dinner created the boundary, but it did not seal it. That happened later, when William and Meghan finally faced each other without distance, without polite intermediaries, and without room to pretend the conflict was merely procedural. By the time William and Meghan finally spoke directly, neither was interested in pretending the argument was about paperwork. Their disagreement had become personal. She believed she was being deliberately erased from a family she had once served beside. He believed the palace could not function if personal relationships automatically guaranteed institutional privilege. When they met privately, the conversation remained controlled for only a few moments. Then William said the sentence Meghan had feared. Some doors would no longer open simply because they once had. William agreed to the meeting because he still believed the dispute could be contained before it became something larger. Harry was not present, which changed the emotional balance immediately. Without him there to defend Meghan or challenge his brother, every sentence landed directly between the two people at the center of the conflict. A working royal is someone who carries out official duties for the monarchy and receives access connected to that role. Meghan no longer held that position, and William believed the palace had to reflect that reality. For her, however, the issue was not only about status. It was about whether years spent inside the family could suddenly be treated as if they meant nothing. Meghan asked the question without softening it. Was he punishing her personally? William stayed seated for several seconds before standing and telling her that returning as family did not mean returning with the privileges she once held as a working royal. The answer cut deeper because it was calm. Meghan pushed back immediately. She told him she knew the difference between security and exclusion because she had lived inside the institution herself. William's expression hardened when she accused him of using procedure to send a message he did not want to say openly. The argument sharpened from there. Meghan insisted that old access had never caused a problem before, while William answered that the review had uncovered several permissions that were still technically active despite her changed role. Those permissions mattered because they could allow entry into areas intended for people with current clearance, not former status. He told her that leaving those arrangements untouched created uncertainty for guards, staff, and the household itself. Meghan heard the logic, but she also heard the finality beneath it. William then said what changed the entire meeting. Those old permissions would be corrected permanently. Meghan realized at once that she had not been invited there to negotiate the terms. She was being informed that the decision was already taking shape. The future king had stopped asking whether the old arrangement could survive and started deciding how it would end. Meghan left without reconciliation, and William did not follow her. Instead, he contacted household staff and made one final request: turn the reviewed restrictions into a clear instruction that security could enforce without hesitation. That was the moment the conflict stopped being personal argument and became palace procedure. Their conversation had closed the last path to compromise. Once Meghan walked away, William stopped arguing about boundaries and began putting them into writing. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. Sometimes it appears as a short instruction, a signature, and a change to a security list. After his confrontation with Meghan, William sat with palace officials and converted a deeply personal dispute into formal procedure. Yet the most revealing part was not the wording of the order. It was William's refusal to soften it. He knew exactly how the decision would be interpreted by Harry, and chose to proceed anyway. William entered the meeting with one goal: remove uncertainty. Security representatives and household officials reviewed which entrances, private rooms, and family areas could still be accessed by former working royals. Household officials are staff who help manage the daily operation, schedules, access, and private arrangements of a royal residence. The distinction mattered because family invitations were still possible, but automatic entry connected to an official role was something different. Meghan could still be welcomed as a relative when a visit was approved. What she would no longer possess was the assumption that previous status opened doors without fresh clearance. The prince read the final instruction in silence. An aide asked whether he wanted the wording softened so guards could use discretion if Meghan appeared unexpectedly. William shook his head. He knew exactly what discretion would mean in practice. A guard at the entrance could be forced to decide whether family history outweighed current instructions. A junior member of staff could suddenly become responsible for interpreting a dispute between two brothers. William refused to put them in that position. He said the order had to be clear enough that nobody at the gate would be expected to negotiate a family conflict. Harry remained in William's thoughts, even though he was nowhere near the room. The future king understood that his brother would see the decision as personal, perhaps even punitive. That knowledge did not change the outcome. William believed uncertainty had already done enough damage. If Meghan arrived without prior clearance and staff hesitated, every second of confusion could become another argument about favoritism, humiliation, or disrespect. For him, a hard rule was painful. A vague one was dangerous. The final instruction carried one condition that changed everything. Meghan could enter when a visit had been formally approved in advance, but previous familiarity with the palace would no longer create automatic access. William approved the wording and ordered the change to take effect immediately. That urgency mattered. It meant the restriction was not sitting inside an unread file waiting for some future date. Guards were informed. Entry procedures were updated. The boundary was active before Meghan approached the entrance. Then the personal dispute became real. William could control the instruction, the list, and the staff briefing. He could not control the emotional shock that would follow when Meghan actually heard the refusal. Harry was about to learn that his brother had not merely discussed a boundary. He had enforced one. And once that truth reached him, the anger would move faster than any palace order could contain. Harry's anger was immediate, because the message felt unmistakable. Meghan had not simply been delayed. She had reached a royal entrance, spoken to guards connected to the institution he had known since childhood, and been told she could not pass. To William, this was enforcement. To Harry, it was humiliation carried out in uniform. The brothers had survived distance, interviews, accusations, and years of strained contact. But now the fracture had acquired something brutally tangible: a locked gate. Harry demanded every detail. Meghan told him she had not even been allowed to wait inside while clarification was sought, and that single fact made his frustration worse. He contacted palace staff and pushed for an explanation, but the answer was coldly simple. The guards had followed a standing instruction. A standing instruction is a rule already placed in force, meaning the people at the entrance were not making a personal choice in that moment. That mattered because Harry could no longer blame confusion or one overcautious guard. The decision had been prepared before Meghan arrived. The Duke called William directly, and the conversation turned tense almost immediately. Harry demanded that the restriction be withdrawn. William refused. The prince insisted that the rule was about access, not revenge. But his brother heard only one thing. Meghan had been publicly stopped because of an order carrying William's authority. When the call ended, Harry pushed his chair back sharply and walked away from the table. He was stunned by the finality. Years of arguments had been painful, but this felt different because the disagreement now had a rule attached to it. Meghan reacted in the opposite way. She was still carrying the embarrassment of standing outside the palace and being told she could not enter, but she did not want Harry begging for access on her behalf. Her voice stayed quiet as she told him that forcing William to reverse the order would only make the humiliation worse. Harry wanted to fight. She wanted control over what happened next. That difference created a new tension between them, even as they stood on the same side of the larger conflict. Harry soon learned something even harder to accept. The restriction was not a temporary cooling-off measure designed to last a few days. It would remain active unless William or the household formally changed it. That meant time alone would not reopen the gate. But then, another message arrived from his brother, and its meaning was impossible to ignore. William said Harry could still request a private conversation with him as family. That invitation changed the shape of the crisis. Meghan remained outside the automatic access system, yet Harry was being offered a path directly to William. The distinction hurt, but it also created the first real chance to confront the deeper wound. For the first time since the gate closed, the conflict moved away from palace procedure and back where it began, between two brothers who could no longer hide behind anyone else. There were no guards between them now. No aides, no written instructions. When Harry and William finally sat alone, the palace crisis was reduced to something painfully simple. One brother asking why his wife had been stopped, and another explaining why he had ordered it. Harry arrived prepared for confrontation. William did not raise his voice. That made the exchange harder, because beneath every argument about security was a truth neither man could avoid. Their idea of family no longer meant the same thing. Harry came straight to the point. He wanted the restriction removed completely, not adjusted, softened, or explained. William refused to move that far. A private family visit meant contact arranged between relatives without carrying the automatic privileges of an official royal role. And that distinction now sat at the center of everything. For the prince, the rule protected staff from being dragged into personal disputes. For his brother, it felt like a permanent reminder that the life he once knew no longer worked by the same rules. Harry finally asked the question that had been building since Meghan was stopped. Would you have done this if it were anyone else's wife? William paused before answering. He said he would do it for anyone whose official access no longer matched their current position. The reply only deepened the hurt. Harry accused him of hiding a personal judgment behind procedure, of turning years of resentment into a security rule. William did not deny that their history mattered. Instead, he said that history was exactly why guards and aides should never be forced to decide who was right in the middle of a family conflict. The room grew quieter as anger gave way to something heavier. William told Harry that Meghan would not regain automatic access, but he offered a compromise. Future private family visits could be approved in advance, quietly and directly, without turning every return into a public test of authority. Harry understood what the offer meant. His brother was not reopening the old door. He was creating a different one. Harry struggled with that distinction, because accepting it meant admitting the final order would stand. William, meanwhile, understood that keeping the rule would damage their relationship further. But he would no longer preserve appearances by leaving palace boundaries unclear. The turning point was not forgiveness. It was recognition. Neither brother got what he wanted, yet both finally understood the position the other refused to surrender. The conversation ended without shouting and without an embrace. Harry left, carrying a fragile understanding instead of a victory, while William remained committed to the boundary he had drawn. But their private settlement was already too late to contain the wider story. Outside the palace, the gate incident had escaped into public view, and the world was about to reduce years of pain, duty, and family conflict to two unforgettable words: access denied. By morning, the palace gate was no longer just the place where Meghan had been stopped. It had become a symbol. Supporters saw cruelty. Critics saw consequences. Royal traditionalists saw William asserting control. And for millions watching from outside, one frozen moment seemed to capture years of unresolved family conflict better than any speech could. The monarchy had always survived disagreement behind closed doors. This time, the closed door itself became the story, and everyone believed they understood what it meant. Meghan saw the coverage and went quiet. Palace communications offered only a short confirmation that entrance procedures had been followed, refusing to turn the dispute into a public argument between relatives. Palace communications are the official messages used to explain royal matters, without exposing every private detail behind them. That restraint mattered, because one emotional statement could have widened the fracture instantly. It also mattered because silence left space for everyone else to decide what the refusal meant. Meghan understood that the moment she wanted to leave behind had now become attached to her name. William watched the reaction grow and refused to answer anger with more anger. Commentators split sharply over his decision. Some described the instruction as necessary discipline, while others saw it as a deeply personal escalation hidden behind security rules. The prince knew that attacking Meghan publicly would only strengthen Harry's belief that the restriction had always been personal. He also knew that apologizing for the rule would make the order look uncertain, so he stayed controlled, even as the story became bigger than the decision itself. The headline changed everything. One national newspaper placed the words "Access Denied" across its front page, above an image of the palace gates, reducing years of family tension to one brutal phrase. Broadcasters repeated the framing throughout the day, and outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the railings as live reports unfolded. Buckingham Palace is the monarch's principal London residence and one of the strongest public symbols of the crown, which made the gathering especially powerful. A private access dispute had now become a national debate about belonging, privilege, and who had the right to move freely inside royal life. Harry saw the same coverage and understood how quickly control had been lost. Meghan was no longer simply the person who had been stopped. William was no longer simply the brother who had issued an order. Both had become symbols in a public argument neither could fully control. Harry knew that every new headline risked destroying the fragile understanding reached in private. The headlines made the conflict enormous, but they could not deliver the final verdict. That would come only after the noise faded, when Meghan, Harry, and William had to decide what remained once automatic access was gone, and whether a closed gate meant rejection or the beginning of a different relationship. In the end, William did not reverse the order. Meghan did not return to the gate demanding another confrontation. Harry did not win the restoration of automatic access. Instead, each was forced to accept something more painful than victory or defeat. The old arrangement was over. The palace would still permit private family contact, but it would no longer pretend that personal history automatically carried royal privilege. What happened at that entrance was harsh, deeply emotional, and unmistakably final. But it also clarified what years of argument never could. Meghan received the next message quietly. A future private family meeting could still be arranged, but it would have to be approved beforehand under the new access process. Prior approval simply meant that entry had to be formally cleared before arrival, instead of relying on old permissions connected to a former royal role. That detail mattered because the family door was not completely closed. Yet another truth was equally clear. Returning would never again mean walking into palace life under the same assumptions she once carried. She read the message, set her phone down, and accepted the boundary without another confrontation. Harry remained hurt by how the restriction had been enforced. His private conversation with William had not erased the anger of knowing Meghan had been stopped at a gate, connected to the family he had known all his life. But the Duke now understood something he had resisted from the beginning. His brother was not trying to erase every personal connection between them. The prince was separating family contact from institutional access, and he had no intention of removing that distinction simply to make the relationship look less fractured. William chose restraint after choosing firmness. He did not widen the restriction, launch a public attack on Meghan, or attempt to prevent future family meetings. The future king kept the decision narrow. No automatic access, clear approval before visits, and no reason for another confrontation at the entrance if those arrangements were respected. That mattered because leadership, in his view, was no longer about avoiding every painful reaction. It was about making rules clear enough that staff, guards, relatives, and the institution itself knew where the boundary stood. The consequences touched all three of them differently. Meghan lost a privilege that once represented her place inside royal life. Harry lost the belief that his own history could automatically shield his wife from new institutional limits. William accepted that enforcing a boundary could damage a relationship he still valued. None of them truly won, but the uncertainty that had fueled the confrontation was finally gone. The palace entrance became the line between two eras. Meghan remained connected to the family through history and personal relationships, but that connection no longer guaranteed royal privilege. William had drawn his line. Harry had finally understood it, and the monarchy chose structure over ambiguity. The gate stayed closed automatically, but the family door remained open by invitation. That was the final order, and the final meaning of the moment. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.